My name is Randi Vogt. My husband and I moved to Calvert County in 1969, and we already saw change starting to happen and became interested in what was happening. I joined the League of Women Voters and was named the land use chairman and didn't know what land use was. And as part of my education, I teamed up with a videotape expert at the time, and we did a videotape interviewing local officials. And I contacted Bernie and Judge Bowen, all the elected officials at the time, and was granted interviews. And that's how I first met Bernie, by interviewing him. I was very struck by the fact that when he talked about the difficulties of dealing with all these different perspectives that are always in a community, that he, first of all, was respectful of all of them. He wasn't disparaging of any particular viewpoint. And the second is that he was a problem solver in the what to my mind was the best sense of that. And he wanted to go out, get information, he wanted to get opinions from people, and then he took a course of action. And I remember one day in particular, we were out in front of what was then the library on the sidewalk. I ran into you, and you started talking about this Pleasant Peninsula Plan, and you wanted everyone to get involved, and I thought, this is the way government is supposed to be. And I was just 22 years old. I was very new to government, and to have a county commissioner, the president of the county commissioners, coming and asking me to participate, and seeing how he was asking everyone else to participate, whoever they were, that's when I believed in the power of local government. It's what led me to go back to college and get a degree in land use planning, and eventually become a staff member in the Department of Planning and Zoning at the time. And I always believed that when you follow that process that Bernie laid out of listening and researching and then exploring options and then coming to a solution, I thought that's the way government is supposed to work. So Bernie really had a very powerful influence on the whole direction of my life from that. Not least of all, you pointed me to the Housing Authority early on and the Planning Commission, and those were wonderful experiences for me. So thank you, Bernie. Bernie, you're best known for the work you've done to protect the water quality of the Patuxent River and the Chesapeake Bay, but what's much less known is the work you've done to protect the overall quality of Calvert County. You served as chairman of the Board of County Commissioners for 12 years during a critical period in the county's history. And not all that long before you took office in 1970, things had been pretty settled and quiet. For decades, there was an established way of life that had its roots way back in the mid to late 1600s. Statistically, the county looked poor, but culturally, it had a long and rich tradition based on tobacco farming and working the water. And then things started to change quickly, and that's what I'd like you to talk about in this interview. First of all, in the early days, what was Calvert County like when you were growing up? And up until the mid to late 60s. I remember when I interviewed you 40 years ago, I asked you a similar question. I asked you, was life more pleasant now than it had been in the past? And you had a very interesting answer to that. I'd like to hear what you think about it today.
Yes, Calvert County was quite different. See, I was born in 1924 and started a school in 1929 in a one-room school at Island Creek. And the lifestyle has changed so dramatically, it's unbelievable. As has the landscape, as has the quality of life, and certainly the quality of our environment. Back then, Calvert County was very little known about Calvert County. There was, at Brooms Island, where I grew up, for instance, there was about 150 homes, and my best recollection, there was only about 6 automobiles. And they used to carpool. People who had the automobiles were kind enough to share their mode of transportation. If you wanted to see a doctor, you had to go to Prince Frederick for some reason. You could always depend on your neighbor that had a car to take you up there. But it was a very subtle life, and yet it was a happy life. There was no electricity. There was no television, obviously. Very, very few radios, and no indoor plumbing. It was a crude way to live, but if you're born into an environment that's the situation, you really haven't seen the other side, so you don't miss it because you haven't experienced it. And it was a rare occasion to ever get off to Brooms Island for anything. I know my first trip to Washington, D.C., which happened in 1942, I believe it was. I went to Washington to go to work. And I graduated from high school at the age of 16 and then went up to the big city. Very lonely at first, and even kind of sad because families were so close-knit in those days. When someone left home for whatever the reason, my sister was the first. She went away to nurses training. And when she left, it was like a funeral. Everybody cried, because you just weren't away from each other. Everybody slept together, slept in the same building at nighttime. No absentees. But there were things that I remember that as a child growing up that will forever be pleasant memories for me. And one I can think of was at the Warren Denton Oyster House on Brooms Island. That was a hub of industry, if you please, because Denton Oyster House bought crabs, fish, oysters, whatever came out of that river. He would buy it from the people who harvested and haul it into Baltimore somewhere and sell it. And that was the way of life. But the one thing I remember so much about the Oyster House is that he employed about 135 shuckers. It was really probably one of the largest operations on the East Coast. He had the A&P contract. He shipped oysters all out west and everything, freighted them out. But the thing that I remember most about that Oyster House was he had 135 shuckers, and as the day wore on and it was getting time for them to quit, go home, most of them had to walk, somebody would start singing, and then somebody else would join in, and shortly that whole Oyster House was just a big room of melody. It was just, and they sang the old Negro spirituals and some of the hymns. It was an experience that I wouldn't trade, but that's a part of our culture, our history that's been lost and lost forever, because recording that in those days was next to impossible. There's just no way to do it. But it's something that certainly lasts forever with you, and it's a warm feeling you have every time you reflect back on those days. In those days, there were only about 4 doctors in the county. I remember well when Dr. Jett came to the county. It was like, the emperor coming to town, or the king or the president, somebody coming to town, because doctors were so scarce. And Dr. Jett, along with the rest of the doctors, they were all country doctors, but they did a good job. All house calls, you rarely ever went to the doctor's office. They drove to your home and saw the patient and would drive back. But that's the way life was then. And I recall so vividly one part of that when I first started at school. I went to a one-room school, and there were 4 siblings. My sister being the oldest in the school. We had them in the first, second, third grade, fourth grade. First, second, third, fourth grade. And I was in the first grade. And I remember the first day I went in that school, this little school teacher, who at that time was Miss Ireland, she later became, years later, she became a Mrs. Gray. She got married. But I remember when I walked in that school that day, I was a little apprehensive. But she made me feel so comfortable. It was just a warm feeling. And from that moment on, I loved school. I never dreaded to go to school because she'd made me feel like I was an important part of the whole institution, so to speak. And I did real well and under her tutorship or under her teaching. She taught all 4 grades. And we had some people that became fairly noted in that school. That was Dr. Everett Briscoe, who was a noted pediatrician in Annapolis, very popular and well noted and well respected. And we had Wallace Ross, who was a professor in education, taught at the University of Georgia for years, just a wonderful person. And the list goes on, but it was a kind of a sparse education, but they got the basics they needed to succeed. And I loved it. Now, our activities, you'd go in school and then about mid-morning they'd ring the bell and you'd run outside, you'd play for 10 minutes, the bell would ring, you'd go back inside, and then lunchtime you got another break. That was a little long. I think that was about 20 minutes. You'd go out and you'd play dodgeball, or we'd play fox and hounds, or whatever we wanted to do after you had your lunch. And it was strange because we actually had, in the morning, we'd get up there early, and the black kids would be there. Of course, the schools were completely segregated. Black kids were there, and they'd be playing ball with us, with the older boys, that is. And when it was time for them to go to school and the bell rang, they'd take off, go to the black school, and there we was at the all-white school. And it never dawned on you that young that it was wrong. That was way of life. But, our country has had some imperfections, and that was one of them. Thank God we were able to get it changed, but for a couple of 100 years, that was the way life was. But Calvert had a lot of good amenities. Our water quality was excellent in those days. The air was so pure, and it was just a wonderful atmosphere and a wonderful environment to be brought up in as a child. Crime was unheard of. I think we had a sheriff. That's about all we had, 1 state trooper and 1 sheriff in the whole county. There was no need for it because people had certain standards they lived by, and they took them seriously. And if you did something wrong, rest assured, before you got home, that information would be given to your mother and father. Then you had to answer to them. So, but it was very slow. It was you farmed or you worked the water. May have been a couple of car garages, automobile garages around, stuff like that, but there was very limited business. I guess Goldstein store is one of the oldest ones. Mr. Goldstein came here as a peddler and finally built a building in Prince Frederick, and that's a long story, one of its own, but that was the hub of the shopping centers. When you needed something, you went to Goldstein store in Prince Frederick. That's a real quick summary of the kind of way we lived in those days. But we didn't mind not having electricity. You just lit the kerosene lamps. And Mother always encouraged us to do our homework before the sun went down because you could see pretty well. After you got through with your chores, you'd do your homework, and That would be it. But hey, we made it. We made it, and none the worse for the wear. But it was a lot of good memories, a lot of hard work in those days. But that's the early part of Calvert County. All the roads were unsurfaced. They were all dirt roads, gravel roads, washboards. It didn't make any difference because it was very limited automobiles, so it wasn't like you needed a beltway to travel on.
We can jump to I guess it would be the mid to late 60s when things started to change quite a bit. There was the dualization of Route 4, talk about the nuclear power plant, the mobile home controversy. There were a lot of things going on that changed. So what were your reactions to that and leading up to your decision to run for county commissioner?
Well, we leave the slow, laid-back, subtle days of yesteryears and kind of fast forward to some activities that took place really during the 60s. But I'll give you a little history of what was going on just before that. Calvert County, St. Mary's, and Charles County operated illegal slot machines. And they had them in grocery stores. For instance, Brooms Island, as small as it was, they had 5 grocery stores. And a lot of the money that they made came from the slot machines. They got from people playing the slot machines. Then we found a time when the parish thought they could get them legalized, and indeed they did. They got them legalized in southern Maryland. And then at a later date, that became unacceptable to the governing office at that time, who was Governor Tawes. He was from, I think, either Cambridge or Chrisfield from the Eastern Shore. And he had set a goal to rid the state of the slot machines. And eventually they did. They made them illegal and outlawed. They nullified the earlier law. But before they were legalized, they had slot machines. And it was rather, almost funny the way it would operate, because when the grand jury was sworn in, the slot machines would disappear. And they would stay hidden somewhere until after the grand jury was excused. Then the slot machines would come back out again. But Tawes had pretty much decided, he and a lot of his folks, that they were going to rid Maryland of slot machines. And they ended up doing that. And doing that, he had a little bit of passion for southern Maryland. And the governor said he'd like to do some things that should be beneficial economically for southern Maryland in the absence of slot machines. So he promised them bridge, the Benedict Bridge and the bridge at Solomon's. Promised the completion of Route 24, dualization all the way down. And then he had the legislature passed a law creating the Tri-County Council, which was a regional group of people composed of the elected officials in the 3 counties. And their goal was to bring the 3 counties together, very neighborly, and to try to plan so that one county would benefit the other. And it was very helpful. Didn't cure all the ills, but it was very helpful. But those of us that we like to think were a little visionary, we see this thing coming, and you got the dualization of Route 24 from Huntingtown all the way to Solomon's. You got a bridge connecting St. Mary's and Calvert County together. The Benedict Bridge had been built then, and so the access was there. And then along with that, there was the effort on the part of Baltimore Gas and Electric to build the nuclear power plant. And frankly, there was very little opposition to it locally. We had some people from outside of the the area that were very opposed to it, and they fought it very hard. Ultimately, it was passed and established, but then you'd have to be an ostrich with your head in the sand, not to see that all of these amenities was going to make a big difference on Calvert's lifestyle. For instance, we knew when you dualized the road, you got the bridge, you got the nuclear power plant jobs, it was cheap land, a cheap place to live. We knew that people would be coming in, low taxes. And so it was certainly a burning consideration that we had, and a handful of us never lost sight of that. My first, I guess, experience in public life, except I was scoutmaster for 4 years and a president of the Prince Frederick PTA for several years. But other than that, I decided I wanted to get involved, so I got appointed to the school board, Calvert County School Board, 1963, and served till 1969. And that gave me an opportunity to start building a base to really be a part of some kind of authority that would set direction for the county, because we knew it was coming, and what some of us saw wasn't a pretty picture. We didn't have any subdivision regulations. We had very limited building inspections, road specifications, the kind of things that you have to have in order to control the quality of the growth you have was absent. So after going through the Board of Education and getting very familiar with the county in every way and all parts of the county, and then the education system was one of the worst in the state of Maryland. Our county was the second poorest subdivision in the state of Maryland. But we knew with the advent of the nuclear power plant and the kind of money that was going to bring, that things would not be the same, that there's opportunity to do some things that really needed to be done. For instance, in health, public safety, and environment, and all these things, it's absolutely woefully inadequate. We knew that had to be done in order to bring orderly growth, and to bring growth that didn't bring away problems with it. So after the experience on the school board, after 6 years, the appointments in those days were for 6 years. Now they're elected. I think they serve 4 years. It was a great experience for me, because often people would ask me, well, when you became a county commissioner later on, said, how in the world could you stand it? How could you tolerate that? You know, people are always banging on you. I said, when you served 6 years on the Board of Education and you went through the complete desegregation of schools, you were ready for anything but another World War III, you know. So that was a great experience for me, and I had a wonderful person there, and it was Mr. Dunkel, Superintendent of Schools. First-class gentleman, very bright man, very humble. He'd get tough when he had to, but I learned a lot from him, and I had great respect for him. We were very close friends. So as the system began to grow a little bit, with our encouragement, I began to become fully aware of what the potential of this county was. And we had this notion that, hey, we can do these things. We're going to have growth. Growth's going to come. But we can have good schools, we can have a good hospital, we can have public safety, we can have recreation, we can have all of these things, because we're going to have the revenue source to do this. At the same time, if we set a plan in place that would establish criteria that we had to live by and construct by, Calvert would be a better place to live. And we never lost sight of that. There was quite a few people involved in that.
But that really was an unusual perspective back then. I mean, there were a lot of people who just said, money's coming, you know, let development come as it may. I still don't know where that came from, where that idea of planning.
Well, they had set a plan in motion in I think it was 1965, I believe, around that time. that was the first zoning. People were very vehemently opposed to it. But the Board of County Commissioners then knew that they're not going to run again. And they were wise enough to know that something had to be done because we're going to grow. And even in those days, while their plan was inadequate at best, at least they established the theme of zoning, which put the wheels in motion. And after the 60s passed, and I decided in 1969, there were a lot of pressing issues in this county that really troubled me. The river in 1969 began to show real signs of deterioration. And so the way the river goes, so goes the bay. We knew it wasn't isolated here in the Patuxent River. We knew it was, the whole bay was in trouble. And tried very desperately to get people to listen, but they just was not taking it serious. They were not taking it serious. And I had some of the older folks telling me, oh, it's cyclistic, it'll be all right. A few years like this, it'll come right back. And but there was a strange feeling I had about the absence of the grass and all the other things. So that was one of the reasons, and I was not happy, and I say this kindly, was not happy with the closed-door system of government we had in those days. And I campaigned on tabletop government. I mean, the people elected you, people have a right to know what you're doing. And so anyway, I decided I'd run, and I was swamped with people trying to tell me not to run because they had already picked the people they wanted to be the next county commissioners. And I recall one night after I made the decision in Fowler, they came around to where the sheriff's office is now. It was the old Calvert House, and told me, we'll make you chairman of the Democratic Central Committee. You know, that'll give you some time, get you some experience if you don't run this time. And I said, well, it sounds like you're afraid of me or something, but I've made up my mind, and win, lose, or draw, I'm in it. If you want me out, you're going to have to beat me at the polls. I'm cutting the deal with nobody. I've got some things on my mind. I want to make sure they come to fruition. So they walked sorrowfully away, and that was the end of that. And I ran for county commissioner in 1970 and was successful, and subsequently ran for 2 more terms through 1982, from 70 to 1982. But now you're a county commissioner, and we had some pretty good team to work together. Commissioner Truman and Dr. George Williams from the 1st District, and we worked together. There were times when we had a little controversy, but on the big issues, I think everybody had insight enough to know we can't stay like we are, and if we're going to grow, we need to grow in such a way that it doesn't turn the county into a haphazard lifestyle. And so that's when we decided to go with the big plan, which later became known as the Pleasant Peninsula Plan. And I don't know whether it was Judge Reimer or whether it was his wife Gracie, but one of them came up with that. I'll credit them both, but we thought it was a great title, and we called it the Pleasant Peninsula Plan, the PPP. So that was the first order of business after we were sworn in to the county commissioner's office on December the 4th, 1970. The first thing was to survey what we had in-house, find out whether we need more personnel, where are our weaknesses, where are our strengths, and let's work together just as though you're running your own home. Let's work, bring the people involved in this, and see if we can't get something going that makes sense for Calvert County. And it was different ideas that people would suggest and all, but we finally ended up with 3 teams, and I happened to be one of them. Judge Reimer was one, and Jack Williams was the other. We presented to the 72 organizations at that time in Calvert County what we call the procedures for the Pleasant Peninsula Plan, And we recruited about 400 volunteers because, again, you know, it's if you want people to do something, people like to be asked. Volunteers sometimes works out. We're blessed with the volunteers we have in this county. But if you've got a tough situation, you want to get the job done, you really need to buttonhole people, let them know what you're about, and make them feel that they need to be a part of it. And the first things we did was first I wanted to change the order of operations. So I got the other two commissioners to agree to have a volunteer from the Ministerial Association to come in, offer prayer before each meeting, and the Pledge of Allegiance. And secondly, it was a 2-to-1 vote on this. I wanted to set up some kind of a recording device to record all the meetings of the county commissioners. And we didn't have the video then, but we did have the audio. And all of the tapes were put in a safekeeping place for posterity. Even today, you could go to the courthouse and pull those tapes out from my early days in early 1970 and listen to the county commissioners meeting, who said what and why. It was a different atmosphere to work under, but it was a good one because we always had people in the hearing room, you know, and we never allowed them to interrupt the meetings. I didn't. I served as president for 9 consecutive years, and I made sure that we ran the ship smoothly. Not unkind to anybody, but I didn't want people popping up and down in the meeting. So we established early rules. We used the Robert's Rules of Order, and I read the book several times, so I knew I was pretty well informed on it. And that's really how we got rolling and getting the general public involved in Calvert County into it. We broke them down into 12 different committees. And then we declared a moratorium after appropriately advertising, you know what we're doing. We declared a moratorium on the subdivision of land because the request for subdivisions was coming in right and left. They knew something was going to happen and they want to get in before we had all these rules and regulations. And we did grandfather one in. That was Ed Apple. They were building some houses, and he did have his plans in. They had been pretty much approved by the Planning Commission at that time. And so...
Ed Apple?
Not Ed Apple. Oh, he lived a lot. Not Ed Apple.
No.
His name was Apple, though, wasn't it?
It was Apple, yeah.
Town of Lesbies.
Yeah, I can't remember.
He had just had a little subdivision.
Yeah.
So we grandfathered him in, and he was happy. And then everybody else, some of them were very disgruntled. But the majority of the people were very happy because they could see it was so public. And we had a new paper that came into being, the Recorder, started by Charlie Molitor. And he said in that, his reporter stayed in that hearing room, reported everything, you know, front page all the time. And that was really a big asset to us. No longer did we have to depend on word of mouth. We had a newspaper that was going to get the word out. And it was really a godsend for Calvert County. You can't operate in a vacuum. I don't care how small or how large you are. You've got to be open, transparent, and when you do that, you're walking a real safe road because most of the time there are brainy people out there, and if you listen to what they're saying, you could grow intellectually, and you could do the right thing ultimately. And that's really, I guess, was the overriding objective, was to simply 3 words: do what's right. That's what is right if you do what's right. And so we finally got the moratorium in place. Nobody could subdivide any more land. We kept it there until the Pleasant Peninsula Plan was totally complete. We had professional planners, as you know, that put the plan together. And it came out when we took our final tally before the plan was approved at a public hearing. There was very limited objection to it. Very limited objection to it because even those who were in the building business could see that this was the right thing to do. We're going to get better homes. We're going to get better roads. We had roads when we took office that an ambulance couldn't get in there, and school buses couldn't get into the subdivision. And we paved we had to gravel and pave about 56 miles of roads that were untravelable, so that school buses could get in, pick the kids up, ambulance could get into someone if someone was taken ill, and but we did all of that, and I think people saw what was happening. They didn't have any objection to it. If they did, it was very minimally, because we made some very, very strong moves in those first 4 years, and I had people that suggested to me that was, I think, a little greedy, that said, you'll never get elected again. But I led the ticket that year. And I had already made up my mind, if the people in Calvert County don't like my style, don't like my leadership, they have a way to correct it in 4 years. Every November, you can do what you want to do. And if they want a Hoboken, New Jersey in Calvert County, I don't want to serve them anyway. But I can tell you the reception that I got was overwhelming. It was one of the finest journeys of my life, going through that period. People were so good to me and so supportive. And I look back over it, and there's not many regrets. We're all imperfect, but there's not many regrets. We can look back and with a sense of pride on how the growth came, because we have had some very wonderful people migrate to Calvert County. They are really community-minded people. They've contributed great deals to our school system. They're very helpful in community organizations. And I would say that, I don't want to sound like Long Island, New York, but if you're going to have growth, you ought to get the best growth you can get. And I think that's what Calvert County did. And I don't think there's any need for anyone to be apologetic about it. I think it's the right thing to do then. It's still the right thing to do. And I guess my hope and prayer is, as the executive body changes in Calvert County, that they won't chop that part of their memory off and forget it. I'd like to see continuity of that kind of thinking, infinitum, because we can still maintain a healthy lifestyle in Calvert County if we don't get too rambunctious and don't get too greedy. And the problem with the bay today, the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries today, is simply greed. We have not kept pace with the kind of things we should have done when growth. We had, I think, about 55,000 people back in the early days in the whole Patuxent River watershed. Today, I think it's about 750,000 people that live there, and most of the waste most of the human waste ends up going into wastewater treatment plants. From there into the stream, the effluent goes into streams, into the river, into the bay, and we've got a long ways to go environmentally to clean our Chesapeake Bay up, but it would be an unpardonable catastrophe if we don't continue, never give up, just never to continue on, and never allow ourselves to become too disappointed, too discouraged. That is not an option for me, I can assure you. And I hope that that represents most of the good thinking people in this county. You can have everything in the world, the biggest bank account, the largest car, the biggest home, and all of that. But when you get a little nearer to the sunset of your life, you look back over your shoulder. Hope you'll see a wake of things behind that really helped to make this a better place to live. And in the absence of that, I think you leave this world with a conscience full of hypocrisy because you didn't do what you should have done. And I appeal to all of the folks that have followed me and those that will follow others, that never lose sight of the fact that there's not anything more important than clean air and clean water. Money, you can't buy those things, and we really need to jumpstart that theory and get it rolling again. I don't know how we can do it, but there's got to be a way. There's some smart thinkers out there, and there's got to be a way that we can remold and remake and begin to take this bay seriously from a dramatic standpoint. It isn't just the aquatic life that we lose out there and the economic engines out there, and I can't even predict a figure that would be appropriate. If you could clean that bay up back to the 1950s, the productivity we had then, there's billions and billions of dollars that could be made. There's a good job market there. All of that's gone right now. There's some nice things happening, but it isn't happening fast enough. And I often say that, the only thing I want to see, I don't expect to live long enough to see the bay cleaned up. I thought in the beginning, some 45 years ago, that we would be able to clean the bay up in 10 or 20 years. And I think if we had to put our shoulder to the wheel and made the investment and set the restrictions in place that we need to make sure that we don't, eradicate the good stuff simply for one word, and that's greed. 5 words, 5 letters, G-R-E-E-D.
I wonder, when you talk about how you got the community behind this plan, it makes it sound like everybody was so happy about it all and followed you, but there was a lot of controversy, wasn't there? And,
oh, yeah.
And there are a lot of people who were very opposed to what you were doing.
Yeah, to suggest that we were able to accomplish some things, particularly the growth issue, and other things that were appropriate. We needed the amenities. If you're going to grow, we knew that we needed a good hospital. We needed a good school system. If somebody is going to move to a county and they are intellectually equipped and they love their family, they're going to ask questions before they move. How's your school system? What about if my family gets sick? What's the health situation down there? How's your hospital doing? Is it safe for my wife to go to the grocery store? What's the crime down there? They're going to ask all the pertinent questions. And we tried to ask those questions. We tried to establish the kind of things that would assure that the right answer would go back to these people, whoever they are. And I think we've been successful, but it didn't happen without some controversy. Because when people who don't have vision or don't want vision, they're looking for today and tomorrow. They're not looking 20 years, 40 years, 50 years down the road. You're going to have trouble with them because their mind's made up. I want to make $1 million this year, and I'm not concerned about next year. And there are a number of those people that are still around, and a number of them that are still trying to make this a hub of productivity, so that their $1 billion will become $2 billion. And I know I'm repeating myself, but that's very secondary when your life grows short. It becomes very secondary in your memory. You want to make sure that you do something to give back to the community, so that the people that you leave behind will have good thoughts about you even years after you're gone.
And here you were, the county commissioner, out there at meetings, talking up the plan. I've never seen any commissioners after that doing that. They sent planning staff out to do it,
yeah.
But you were very hands-on. I guess that was just part of your philosophy about how to get things done, or
I always felt when I was in public office that that's the people's office. Really, I'm their representative. I'm their figurehead. I'm their mouthpiece. But I ought to be doing things that replicate what they want me to do. They're the ones that voted for me. And I never lost sight of that at all. I would hope that that idea would be resurrected, so that one of the things that I omitted telling you was that initially I suggested to the county commissioners, the 2 other members, and they agreed, I would like to appoint a citizens advisory committee. And that would entail all walks of life from all sectors of the county. And again, that would be something that would not be political appointments as such. How do you do it? Well, my suggestion is just write to all the business, civic, citizens organization, ask them to send us 3 names in. We'll appoint 25 people. And we'll let the secretary, let her make a chart. And the secretary did make a chart. As the names came in from a number of organizations, she'd put their names down. And then if they were on several organizations, like if they were a member of the Lions Club, and they were a member of League of Women Voters and a member of something else, they gave them 3 stars. We may have picked just the 3 stars. That's how they were picked. I didn't pick them, nor did the other 2 commissioners. The secretary put the chart together and then told us who the eligible candidates were. And in one instance, I did go out on my own and recruit people because we did not have representation from the black community. And I went out and hand-picked people in the black community that I knew were civic leaders, they were community leaders, they were good people, and people that loved Calvert County. They just, for some reason or other, they got dropped out of the loop. And so we ended up with a number of blacks on there. And every issue that came up in Calvert County, before we discussed it publicly, went to this committee. The first meeting we had, I was able to talk the governor into loaning us his yacht to take them all out on this on the governor's yacht. And we went to St. Michael's, had dinner over there, but we had a meeting aboard the yacht. I explained the whole process. Now, what we want you to do, when we have an idea, we're going to present it to you. Then we want you to go back to your organization, Lions Club, Rotary Club, Kiwanis, whatever it is, church, civic, talk to them about it. Then the next time that we meet, we want you to give us the feedback. Is it good, bad, or indifferent? And most of the times, that's the way it happened. That citizen advisory, it wasn't treated lightly. And they were very important people. They were people that had a record of doing things right and wanting things done right. And we had a few people that were on the other side, but you know, that's the way you deal with it. But that Citizen Advisory Commission was a great sounding board. Some ideas we had, we put before them. They thought it wasn't a good idea. It died. We didn't push it any further.
When you were working on the Pleasant Peninsula Plan, there were some major issues like land use, the environment, agriculture. Were there any in particular that stuck out in your mind as being essential? I suppose you would say the environment from your perspective.
I think because of the people that were involved, and they had certainly receptivity to what we were doing. I think because of them, and most of those people were trusted in the community, that the opposition, for instance, in the agricultural preservation, that was a hot button. But 3 of us met, Bill Geiser, Greg Boyne, and myself. We'd go to Maryland Tobacco Growers Association, we'd meet with 4 or 5 farmers. And we went to the farmers and told them what we're trying to do. We're trying to save agricultural land in Calvert County, but we don't want to save it at the price of, you know, demeaning your investment. And that was the reason for the TDRs and all that came on later on. But wherever you saw a little fire smoldering, you dealt with that. You didn't ignore it, and wait till it got into a public hearing where you had, you know, a little bit of chaos. And I think it was because of the way that everything was handled. For instance, my first budget in 1970, if I recall it correctly, was about $4 million. The first check that I got from Boiler Gas and Electric in 1975 was for $7.5 million. Not too many years later, we got a check for $13 million. So we knew when we put that plan together, and it called for recreational parks in each district. It called for a new hospital. It called for expanded public safety, sheriff's department, marked cars, and all that. We knew that we would have the money to take care of that, and it was the right thing to do. While there was a group of taxpayers who was led by one of the public officials who was highly respected in the county here, didn't agree with the Pleasant Peninsula Plan at all. But the idea that they had was, we can drop taxes down to $1. Well, we could have, there's no question about it. But you can see, by dropping the tax rate, you would be pulling people in hand over fist, and we weren't ready for that. So we stayed the course on the tax. I did at one time try to give them a tax break, and the way I interpreted it in Article 25, we had the authority to do it. What it simply did was to give everybody in Calvert County, including the industry, business, and all, which included BG&E, $1,000 tax break, $1,000, and it had very little impact on the total revenues coming in at that time. But it did show that we were in good faith about it. That was challenged in court. It was upheld in the lower courts, but when it took it to the Court of Appeals, we lost that. So that's one of the minor disappointments that I had. But it was an attempt to accommodate those that were screaming, you need to do something about taxes, and at the same time not erode the revenue, because we had the liability here in the nuclear power plant, and it seemed thoughtless to create a situation where we'd cut their taxes in half. You're talking about millions and millions of dollars, and then the tax burden would, at a later date, would have to come on real estate tax. You'd have to raise taxes again. So anyway, that was an interesting part of it.
Before you received, or the county received, a national award for it, and you went to Hawaii and got all kinds of kudos for this. Tell a little bit about that, and because that really set Calvert County apart. That planning process.
Yeah, we were very humbled by that, and to this day I think back over it, and it just because of the contributions that the people in this county made, the people that made me, it's a very humbling experience when you think little old Calvert County, not too many years ago, was unheard of, and now we're getting a national award because we have created a planning procedure that had never been tried and tested before, and we had nothing but complete success with it. So we got a national award with it, and then I got a big long letter complimenting me on it, and they were going to present an award, and it would be in Honolulu in Hawaii. I'd been to Hawaii a couple of times when I was going overseas during the war. We stopped off there for a few days, and then coming back, they stopped us off at Waikiki Beach, and we kind of swam around the water there and got humanized for a while, for about a week, and then he brought us back to the state, which was a good thing to do, because the environment you experience over there and the sights you see is something that needs to be tempered before you bring that back home with you. And so I did. But the trip to Hawaii, someone proposed that the county pay for the trip, and I said, well, if the county pays for it, it'll pay for it without my vote. Since I'm affected, I am not going to vote for it. And that meant the other two commissioners had to vote for it. Well, one other commissioner would not vote for it. So I paid my way down and back, paid for my lodge and everything down, and was happy to do it. At a later date, I believe it was the League of Women Voters or some organization that got together and reimbursed me for most of the money that I spent on it, because they thought it was unfair. This was quite an honor to the county, and yet here I am paying for my trip. But all during our 12 years, we never had lunch on the county. We went out and bought our own lunch, and now they have lunches catered in. It's change in, I guess, procedural change, and there's nothing wrong about it. It's the right thing to do, but we just decided that we could afford to buy our lunch. We didn't eat the county. You have to eat lunch if you're at home, right?
Well, the plan was a total success, the process was a success, and then it came to implementation. And there was a period of time after the plan was adopted when there was still a lot of rezoning requests coming up. And when I read back on how that evolved, for a while the Planning Commission would recommend against a rezoning. The board would, this was before your term actually, before they would routinely approve the rezonings. And after the Pleasant Peninsula Plan, it looked like it was headed in the same direction, but you really stood firm against approving a lot of these rezonings. And I know Tom Reimer worked very hard on that, but had you not followed up on the plan itself and what it called for, we would have had strip commercial development all up and down Route 4, I believe. I mean, that must have been tough for you to make those calls.
Well, I looked at the Pleasant Peninsula Plan, and I compared it to a road map. Now we have GPS and all that good stuff, but remember, we used to use the paper road maps. That's how we traveled. And so if I were going to take a trip to Fort Myers, Florida, or West Palm Beach, Florida, I'd get my old maps out, the East Coast, and that's the way I'd put it. And I'd follow that map religiously. That's how I got there. Well, that's what I did with the Pleasant Peninsula Plan. It established certain criteria to live by and to take action by, and that's just like a road map. I followed that. I remember one time I felt so sorry for this person. I won't mention any names. And it was so sincere when he came in, and I said, well, my heart tells me to vote for this. Well, as soon as I voted for it, it wasn't 6 months later till he had sold the property for a big sum of money and moved out of the county. That'll never happen again as long as I'm in public office. My heart will lead me, but when it comes to things that contradict that plan, I'm going to stand tall in the saddle. And I'll take my licks. I'm just not going to compromise. And there were some big people that wanted zoning. I mean, some powerful people who wanted zoning. And I never voted for it. Some of it got through, but it got through without my vote.
I noticed that.
I just think that nothing is perfect. The plan itself was not perfect, but it was a darn good benchmark to go by. And I tried to keep myself educated to the fact, look, you're a big part of getting this going. This plan has meant a lot to the county. This is no time to get weak knees. Stick with it and go with it. And I did. And even with all of the threats that I had that they were going to defeat me, I never had a close election. Never had a real close election. No barn burner. Didn't have to wait for absentee ballots to come in to see whether I won or not. And I think that is a real strong answer from the people. And people were voting in those days. They backed off voting some of them, but people were voting that days. They had pretty good percentage rating for voting. And that gives you the strength you need to carry you through the stormy days, the stormy times, and they will come. They will come. But you just have to stabilize your mind. You have to stabilize your position and try desperately not to lose your diplomacy, to move forward, to be as kind as you can, but also remember that plan was developed by 400 people with complete public support at the end, and that should never, ever be ignored. That even though it's imperfect, it should never be traded off for something because somebody wants to make a few dollars on it.
Then one of the goals, you talked about this a little bit, but preserving farmland, that was one of the goals in the Pleasant Peninsula Plan. And 2 years passed after adoption and no action had been taken. And then you called a very well-attended meeting where you stated that if we didn't do something about developing an agriculture preservation program, there wouldn't be any farmland left in 25 years. I remember that meeting very, very clearly. And within a year, the county became the first county in Maryland to have an agriculture preservation program. I see the way you handled that as a example of your leadership style, because you didn't come out with an answer. You said, all right, folks, here's the problem. How do we solve it? Do you want to talk at all about how you approached your leadership style, or where it came from, or because that seemed to be a very unique part of what
You know, doing my career in public service, particularly on the local level as county commissioner, I've always held agriculture very high because the farmers are the one who raise the food that we eat and the fiber that sustains our lives, and they're good people. They're hard-working people. For the most part, they are very neighborly, and they're people that'll pitch in and give you a hand if you need it. So I've had there's two groups that I've always had a very warm spot in my heart for. That was the farmer and the waterman, because I've done a little of both. Farming was very meager. I helped my grandfather, both of my grandfathers, but it was never a career for me. It was never a profession for me. But you could see what was happening. That even with the zoning we had, which required you to have 5 acres to build on, that was good when we passed it. I tried to get 10, and I was outvoted. But even at 5 acres, it looked like it was going to work pretty good at first, and then we get this we're spreading all over the farmland. So what do you do about this? And I remember talk with Greg Boyne. I was responsible for Greg going to work with Tri-County Council as a planner. I was chairman of the council at that time, and also pretty responsible for him getting in on the planning department here in Calvert County. And Greg is a good thinker. He's a real good thinker. And there's a fellow by the name of Bill Geiser. I don't know whether that rings a bell or not. And he was gung-ho for ag preservation. So we sort of joined as a trio. And we went all around this county talking to farmers. Sometimes it'd be 4 or 5 people here, 4 or 5 people there. We explained to them, we're not trying to take your farm away from you. We're not trying to do anything to you that's injurious to you. We're trying to save farmland at the same time, not hurt you financially. And it took a little time, but the final meeting we had after all of this planning and talking and cajoling, and we visited other areas, talked with other officials, had a public meeting at Calvert County High School, and we took a vote that night. The farmers and the people in general. There was only one hand in opposition to it. I won't mention that name, but he was in opposition to everything. I don't know whether he's still living or not. I've lost sight of him because he and I didn't walk the same walk. So, but anyway, it was passed, and it turned out to be, while everything is imperfect, we know that, each of us are, it was a step in the right direction to preserve a very, very extremely important part of Calvert's culture, and that's to retain agriculture. I think we've done pretty doggone good when you look back at the acres that's been saved, that in agriculture in perpetuity. And I get a lot of comments from newcomers, so I really enjoy driving down the road to see a cornfield over there and another soybeans over here, and he said it's kind of fun. You don't see that in many counties in Maryland, particularly in the urban areas. So, the farmers get kind of whipped for the demise of the water quality. But if you think back, we don't have 10% of the agriculture we used to have. You think back to my childhood days, that Patuxent River on both sides, every field was full of tobacco. Tobacco was king then. And they actually side-dressed the tobacco with urea, which is I mean, really strong nitrogen. And that if you had a rain, a lot of that would wash into the river and do the things that we're trying not to do, and that's to enrich the river with the nitrogen and phosphorus and toxicity. But the farmers today, in my opinion, I'm speaking of southern Maryland now. I know the other areas, and I've not at least been hesitant to say Delmarva's a real problem over there with all those birds and all that manure. We still haven't been able to, they're working on it. They're working on it, but we haven't been able to really get a handle on that. And it has such an impact on the people like the Purdue people that raise millions and millions of birds, and that's food for the people that need to eat, and it's also pretty good income for those who are operating it. But I am told, and I have to take the scientist's word for it, that the land in which this manure has been spread is so thick that, you know, through natural process, it would take 50 years for that to correct itself. And a point I want to make here, and this may be a good time to make it, is that 50 years, I'd be 140 years old. Moses made it 120 years. And you know, if you look back at Moses when he led the Israelites out of Egypt after 400 years of bondage, he didn't get to the promised land. He got to see it from the top of the mountain, but he did not get to see the promised land. And it's not a compelling or a compulsive reason for me to see it, as long as we know we've got in place without compromise the kind of tools and the plan that's going to do the job. Mm-hmm. So what if it took? How long did it take to build the Notre Dame over in Paris? 125 years or something like that. The architects that started that, the engineers that did the people that did the blueprint, none of them lived to see it. It wasn't important, but it got done. And so that's the way I like to look at the Chesapeake Bay. I know I'm digressing, and I'm a perfect candidate for that. But wherever I go, the bay keeps flashing in front of me, particularly my beloved Patuxent River. After 45 years of working very hard, the Patuxent River today is in worse shape than it was when I started back in 1969. That was one of several things that catapulted me into a public office. And for that, I am not discouraged, but I am certainly disappointed. But there's no room in my heart, mind, or soul to stop until physical or mental reasons make that a necessary thing, because that Chesapeake Bay is so precious and so economically important. But even more so than that, we're now seeing the Vibrio vulnificus raising its ugly head out there. If you got a scratch or cut on you, the hot months of July and August, you want to be very careful how you go into the river. And I'm not suggesting that we, put up signs, do not go in the river, but I can tell you that that is bad stuff. It can cause even a fatality. And we know that because we've had people who have died from it. We've also had people who have lost limbs from it. And I have personal friends of mine that has gone through some very trying times and intensive care and all. We really digressed that time, but I guess it gave me a chance to focus in on the bay one more time. And I don't think we can repeat that enough, because I don't see the same measure of excitement and enthusiasm now that I did not too many years back, when people would, every store I went into, people would say, "How's the river coming along? Is the bay getting any better?" Well, they've seen hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent, and we've done this, and I think we can take some pride that we've stopped it from dying. But the improvements are there in some areas, but those improvements are not significant enough to throw the towel in and say, oh, we've got it made now, it's improving. But farmland is important. It'll always be important. We had in the 20th century 1 billion people on this planet. The 21st century, 7 billion. They expect that to double in the not too distant future, 14 billion people. We need the agricultural land to raise the food and fiber to feed these people. And it's absolutely every acre of agricultural land we saved. I said it back in the 70s. Land for agricultural purposes down the road, my vision tells me, will be worth more than it will be for a developer to buy and build on. That's how important it'll be. Food prices will be significantly higher, but at least we'll have the land to raise that food on. And that's a component that we can't shirk. We've got to do it. We've got to save agricultural land. We've got to make sure that farmers are comfortable. And if they deserve penalty, I have no sensitivity about that. But I just refuse to accept the fact that the farmers of southern Maryland are the problem with the Patuxent River. They are not the enemy of the Patuxent River. The enemy of the Patuxent River is the air deposition and runoff, which includes agriculture, and the wastewater treatment plants. That's the pie chart that's taking us down.
Well, I have tried to focus on your years as county commissioner. I think we've covered a lot of territory, but is there anything about those years that you'd like to talk about that I haven't asked you about yet? Or
Well, there's some things, and I've never talked about it, but there's some things you get a chance to do. Like a kid when I was in the Senate, catches me in his store and says, "You're Mr. Fowler, you Senator Fowler, aren't you?" "Yes, I am. What's your name?" "I'm John Doe." "Johnny, how you doing? What can I do for you?" "Well, Mama told me that she knows you well, went to school with you, and I don't have the money to pay to go to college, and I just wondered how I can go about getting a scholarship." It's those kind of things, they're absolutely so valuable to you because you've helped somebody that really needed help. And I recall, I won't mention the names, I called one man, he's well known in this county. He was a volunteer fireman from the day they started, and a good one. Good person, good family man. He had his home and he had his car, but they both were heavily mortgaged. And he had some serious illnesses. He had a heart problem. He also had cancer. And he was trying to get disability. Well, I had a little connection with the federal government at that time. I could go through Stanley Hoyer or someone else, Barbara McCoskey. But he told me the situation, says, "I'm going to lose my home. I'm going to lose my car. We're way behind in payments. They've already told us they're going to foreclose. And I cannot get them to agree to my disability. And you know my situation. I can't work. I'm unable to work." And he was. And man, he didn't have more than 6 months to a year that he lived. So it would almost bring tears to your eyes. And I called the head goose up. I told him who I was. I said, "You don't know me and I don't know you. You don't owe me anything. I owe you a lot if you'll help me out." But anyway, I gave him the name and all. And he's been struggling to try to get this for so long now. Why is it that the bureaucracy is so stubborn? I can tell you, if you trust me any at all, and that's one thing I'm not going to do, is lie to you. That's one thing I will not do to you. This man needs it. He needs it now. He can't wait. He don't have more than 6 months or a year to live. He's going to lose the home and his car. At least give him the memory of knowing that he saved that for his wife and children. So I said, will you look at it personally? Will you look over that personally? And will you call me back? And he said, "You've convinced me, yes, I will." And he called me back a couple of days later, and he said, "You want to call so-and-so and tell him?" No, you called him. You called him. You're the man done it, and I didn't do it. So he called me, and it wasn't 15 minutes after he called. This man called me on the phone. "Senator Fowler?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "My check will be in the mail next week." I cried like a baby. I really did. That's what makes you feel good. You know, you get some hard nose out there that he's going to beat up on you because you didn't give him his own, or you didn't give him his permit to do this and that and the other. But then when you find some humble person like this that really needs help, and you're able to do it, not because I had the authority, it was because I was able to convince that man that I was serious. This was desperate. He had to do something. It's a feeling that you take to the grave with you. It's just a good feeling when you look back. And more people ought to be doing that. More people ought to be doing that because it's worth all the paychecks you could get. And I have seldom get emotional about something, but that one, when he called and told me that, I mean, I got my handkerchief out and I sat cried like a baby. Nobody there but me would answer the phone. And a wonderful person. I was one of his pallbearers, and I was honored to do that. But there are things like that you don't mention, don't talk about, but I rarely go somewhere that somebody doesn't walk up to you. You remember me? And you know my mama. You went to school with my mama, or you went to school with so-and-so, my brother, somebody, or my uncle. I want to thank you for that scholarship. I couldn't have made it without your help. It was not my money. It was a state scholarship fund. And there again, I set up a scholarship fund. I never knew who was going to get it. Unless, like this one kid that came up to me, I said, if he's worthy of it, give it to him. If he's worthy of it, give it to him. But I had a school teacher. I had a minister. I had a superintendent of schools. I had everybody that knew something about education and knew something about human beings on that committee. And all of my applications were immediately shipped to them. They'd have a meeting go over, and they decided who would get it. And I felt good about that. Now they've taken that away from the senators because it was a pie that some of the senators used, a little reckless. That's the way they got the votes. Well, I never knew who was getting the scholarships. And rarely did I ever get a letter from people thanking me for them. That was a very rare occasion. If I did, I've got it in my file around there. There are not many. That wasn't on your agenda either.
Well, I wanted you to tell me about things like that. That's important.
Oh, my goodness. Listen, no man is an island. And had it not been for the wonderful people, and they were so equipped intellectually, helped me along the road, I couldn't have made it. And I think of Colonel Bowlby. He was worth his weight in gold. I think of when it was a 2-to-1 vote to bring Jack up in as the county administrator. Jack is very quiet, and he's not a high-profile person, not one to jump in front of the cameras and try to take credit for stuff. He's laid back, but he was one of the smartest men I ever met, and a very decent man. I worked with him until I went to the Senate. And Jack was very helpful. If I had something, I tried out on him. And if he thought it was a bad idea, he'd tell me, and he'd give me his reason why he thought it. That was before I was just planting the seed then to find out whether something would really float. The names Judge Reimer, Tom Reimer was such an ally. I went to see him not too long ago, and his hearing is getting kind of bad. He couldn't hear what I was saying very well. But I begged him to run for the Senate. You run for the Senate, and I'll go to the House. No. I want you to go for the Senate. So I ended up being in the Senate mainly because of his encouragement and insistence. I never will forget the story that he told me. My opponent in St. Mary's County, it was, you know who that was, it was John Quaid. And John was over here in the shopping center in Prince Frederick with a borrowed RV and all of these campaign people, and they were drinking cocktails and enjoying themselves. I'm over in Town Creek, 95-degree weather, beating on doors, telling me, listen, I'm Bernie Fowler, you don't know me. I'm going to tell you a little something about me, what I stand for. I want to be a senator, and here's why. And I ended up winning pretty handily. But Tom told me that John came to him and told him, said, you've been pushing Bernie to run for the Senate. Said he wouldn't run if you hadn't pushed him. And he said, now you're gonna make me spend $10,000 to beat him. I always thought that was a pretty funny story. Anyway.
There were a lot of other characters.
Oh, I think of Fred Gettle. Do you remember him?
Yes, yes.
Fred Gettle, big old guy, retired serviceman. But you know, he was a good thinker, and he really was a great contributor. There was Dr. Wilson down in Scientist Cliffs. Don't even remember his first name, but when he came to the office and gave me advice, I knew it was well thought out, and I knew it was worth listening to and taking heed to. And I really cherished him. He was a very quiet man, didn't have a whole lot to say, but when he spoke, he said something. And Gracie Reimer, when she was Secretary of the Board of County Commissioners, she was a jewel to work with. Very bright lady. And she had political savvy because her daddy was a big politician. Mr. Meade was a big politician one time. He and Mr. Wesley Stennett in the north end of the county. Anything got done up there, I mean, they were the movers and shakers, particularly during the election. But then a lot of kids, I can't name the names, just hundreds of kids. I had a busload of kids come to Annapolis one time and testified on my bill that I was told would never get through the General Assembly. It was mandatory requirements of wastewater treatment plants in excess of 500,000 gallons of effluent per day. And we had some big plants. We had Western Ranch, Parkway, and the Savage. The 10 major plants is what I was after. I want to get them retrofitted, get them to meet certain limitations on nitrogen and phosphorus. And we did that. And that busload of kids came up, and I never will forget the chairman of the committee. He got me in the corner afterwards. Also, he said, you know one thing? I'm going to report you to the Ethics Commission. How did we get by without passing your bill when you bring those kids up here? But it worked, and the governor wasn't going to sign the bill. It was Senate Bill 562. And I went over and talked with him, almost with tears in my eyes, and he said, it's a mean bill. I said, Governor, I've been doing this a lot of years, and sometimes you have to get the hair up on your back a little bit to get something done. Yes, it's mean, but we've waited so many years. We have a plan that's collected dust that requires that, and it hasn't happened. And the only successes we've had, only real progress we've had is through mandatory legislation and actions we've taken in court. Both is not exactly what you want to do, but if that's what you have to do to get the job done, this bay and that protection river is very important. That for a while, he said, would it make you feel any better if I told you I'd sign the bill for you? And I said, oh, you'd make me happy, because his staff had told me, no way is he going to sign it. But Governor Schaefer signed that bill. And, after those plants got cleaned up in the early 90s, when we did the weighing in down at Prudence Island, grass was knee-high down there. The transparency of the river had improved so much. You could see the little critters coming back, grass shrimp coming back. And, man, I was like I died and gone to heaven. I figured, man, we really are, I can witness some success here. The problem we had is we didn't take into account the fact that as we grow, the volume is going to increase humongously, and that's going to neutralize the progress that we made. So we only had 20 million gallons going. Today, as we speak, it's over 60 million. That's tripling the amount we had. So the progress we made, was kind of short-lived because of the reason I just mentioned. I've tried over and over again. We had a bill that Sue Collins put in for me. If she's elected this time, I think she's going to be, I'm going to see if I can get her to introduce the bill again, just one more time. But what it would do would bring the levels of the total maximum daily loads and all back to what it was in the 50s, when we know we had 12 foot of transparency at Sheridan Point and other places in the summertime, Drum Point. And if we could use that as a gauge, and we could get that bill passed, it's expensive, but if we get that bill passed, we'd have one river that would start looking like the old Patuxent used to look. Yeah. So, and the last but not least, it's I borrowed it from Winston Churchill, who was a great statesman. He came to the service in time to be a big help in World War II. He was a man that liked a little libation, and there's all kind of stories about that. But it was a big improvement when they took Chamberlain out and let Winston take charge, because he had been telling them for years what was going to happen, and they ignored him. He's a very smart man. But the thing I remember about him most of all is he gave a speech one time, and in that was 8 words: never give up. Never, never, never give up. And I've adopted that as a roadmap, for myself in my effort on the river. There'll come a time when I'll not be able to do the things that I like to do. May come a time when I'm not able to even lead the way. But we've got that set up now so it'll go on in perpetuity. And again, I just like Moses and just like the Notre Dame. Those folks didn't see the end, and we probably won't see the end. But for the good of the world in general, and particularly those that we love dearly here in the land of pleasant living, we've got to continue to screw down on that plan until we get it where it is no way they can fail. And we aren't there yet. We aren't there yet. One of the serious flaws of the new plan, I voted against it on the Chesapeake Bay Commission and explained to them why. Because the plan sounds good until you get to the very end. Now, New York, West Virginia, and Delaware are now partners. And the EPA did that because they're in the watershed, so they automatically made them a part of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. But the very end of the plan, I forget the exact word, but since this organization is really collaborative volunteerism, there's no legal compulsion to do this. We hope that everybody will cooperate, but it gives anybody a chance to opt in or opt out on it. TMDLs. Do you think the state of New York is going to support that? I don't. You may as well be talking about the Everglades or the Mississippi River or some other place. It's out of their sights, out of their mind. And that's the one part of the plan that troubles me. I'm still fighting. Every chance I get, I run my mouth about it. But it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. We are not going to clean the bay up until you have a mandatory plan in place that is uncompromised, that forces people to do it. Is it going to take money? Yes. Billions and billions of dollars. That's why I wanted to use the Patuxent River as a laboratory. And the current governor, I really thought that Governor O'Malley was going to kind of support me on it, because we were very close friends and worked very tight on Bay issues. Came to a lot of my weigh-ins. And when I finally asked him, I discussed it with him back when he was campaigning. And I said, I don't want you to tell me yes or no now, but what's wrong with taking the Patuxent River? Don't stop the work on the other tributaries. Take the Patuxent River and use that as a laboratory. Move post-haste on it. Get the resources from the federal government, the state, wherever you can get it, to move the Patuxent, expedite all of that. You have a laboratory there. You've got a benchmark. You can tell whether the plan is working or it's failing. You can tweak the plan as you go along without waiting until 50 years from now you find out it isn't working. I mean, really shorten the time span on this, rush that, and make sure it's working there. Then you've got ample reason to utilize it throughout the watershed, the 64,000-mile watershed at Chesapeake Bay. And he he finally told me that he didn't agree with me, that you can't clean, but he's wrong. He's absolutely wrong.
That's the one river that's completely in Maryland.
Well, he said it's like a person that has sepsis, in the arm. You take care of the arm, but you let the rest of the body die. And I responded to, in fact, I've got copies of the letter here. I'd share them with you. His letter to me and my letter back to him. But he's absolutely wrong on that. Every scientist worth his salt has told me the impact of the Chesapeake Bay, the flushing action Chesapeake Bay will have very minimal influence on the Patuxent River. If we can put in check all the wastewater treatment plants, and we can find a way to stop the runoff from going into the storm water, which is about 50% of it, which includes agriculture, and hopefully some way, because we got air deposition coming from Ohio and different places, and that's 25% of the problem. But if you use the Patuxent River and you went post-haste on this, I think the Patuxent River would prove that it is receptive to being cleaned up, and it would react accordingly. Walter Boyington, who is one of the brightest minds on water quality in the Chesapeake Bay, don't compromise, you're right. And when Walter tells me I'm right, I'm right. I'm not going to back off. So we're not going to give up. Whoever the next governor is, we're going to be right in his office talking to him about it.